Hey everyone listening, trying to find direction and move with intention. Welcome to Moving with Intention, a podcast by Black Sheep Coaching. We hope the episode you're about to listen to is empowering, insightful, and helpful. We hope you're moving with intention in your life and taking actions, as small as they may be, towards becoming the person you want to be and living the life you want to live. Disclaimer: this podcast may contain discussion of sensitive topics that may trigger some individuals. Listener discretion is advised. This podcast is not a substitute for mental health professionals or resources, and we encourage you to seek those out should you need them. Welcome to Moving with Intention. I know I said the next episode was going to be on needs and wants, but I think I'm going to have to do a dopamine part 2. As previously mentioned, dopamine and the concept of reward-seeking behavior is something that's very interesting to me. Possibly because I think I've recognized some of that behavior in myself, but I think I also observe that in other people and in society. I think this notion of chasing the reward and not feeling good enough until we actually achieve that big reward, as opposed to feeling happy and feeling fulfilled with the journey and the steps along the way. I think that's something that can negatively affect a lot of people. I think it plays into this pleasure seeking, reward chasing, dopamine driven behavior, which can be the basis for addiction based on things that I have read and my research. Once again, I'm not a medical professional. However, I do tend to do quite a bit of reading and I like to delve into these topics. So today we're going to talk about, in my opinion, one of the easiest, accessible, low barrier ways to get these dopamine fixes or highs. And this particular method is available to extremely young children and to adults alike. Today, we're going to be talking about smartphones and social media and their connection to dopamine and reward systems. So in this episode, I'm going to reference 2 articles. They will be linked in the show notes if you want to take a look at them. But the first one is named Connect to Thrive, or is titled Connect to Thrive: Social Connection Improves Health, Well-Being, and Longevity. And this is by, I'm not sure on the last name pronunciation, but Emma Sapaya, PhD. And it's also been peer-reviewed as well, it looks like, or editorially reviewed. And that one is from Psychology Today. And we'll also be looking at another article, Are You Addicted to Social Media? And this is by lehealth.org, which seems to be a health and wellness organization or company. So, in reading about social media and dopamine, I mean, these are things that I've heard of before. These are things that I think are discussed in society, the notion of smartphones and dopamine, and you might have heard the terms instant gratification. And I wanted to explore social media as a dopamine delivery system. So, social media and the notion of internet connectedness has been around for what, 30-ish years, maybe more if you want to talk about like the ARPANET and the beginnings of the internet as a military communication tool. But when we talk about it as a community building tool, I remember in my high school days, things like, or even in my elementary school days, things like GeoCities and chat rooms and Yahoo sites and MySpace. MySpace was one of the uh, one of the big social media platforms. And yeah, hi Tom. But I think this notion of being connected through the online world has had its benefits, but it's also had consequences. It's been proven, and there are various studies that show that being connected with others and socializing is good for physical health, psychological well-being, There are studies referenced in the Psychology Today article that show that lack of social connected is a greater detriment to health than obesity, smoking, and high blood pressure. And those are three very big loaded words: obesity, smoking, and high blood pressure. I mean, how many times have we heard about that in the health space? They also talk about, on the flip side, how strong social connection leads to a 50% increased chance of longevity, and how social connection strengthens our immune system as well. That there are genes impacted by social connection that also code for immune function and inflammation, and helping us recover from disease faster, lengthening our lives, etc. Social connection has also been linked to lower rates of anxiety and depression, it seems. And studies, according to this article, have shown that people who have those social connections have higher self esteem, they're more empathetic, more trusting, more cooperative. And social connectedness can create this feedback loop of positive social, emotional, and physical well being, according to the article. And from my perspective, I can absolutely see that. I know that when I socialize, I tend to lean more to the introverted side, but I think I do see great benefit in having a night out with friends, or having a conversation, or playing like a multiplayer video game with somebody. I think that socialization and that social connectedness is very important for our health. Um, and at least from my personal experience, it's absolutely critical to my well-being. We look at we look at COVID and the pandemic, and people having to socially isolate and social distance, and we know that there were mental health impacts of that. So the article is really interesting, and in the end they close up by saying, if you're shy, if you're introverted, if you find it hard to meet people, to rest your worries, because the interesting fact about being socially connected, it's nothing to do with how many followers you have, how many friends you have, how many likes you get, um etc. It's more so to deal with how you perceive it. It seems to be very subjective. If you feel that you have enough friends and you socialize enough and you feel fulfilled in that, according to this article, you reap the benefits of that socialization. So it's been proven that being socially connected can have a good impact on physical health, psychological well-being, etc. But in this article from Lee Health, we talk about the notion of addiction and social media addiction and the dopamine loop. So I'd like to quote the article, and this is a quote from Paul G. I think Simone is the way it's pronounced. Paul G. Simone, PhD, who is the vice president and medical director of behavioral health at Lee Health. And the quote is: "There's growing evidence to suggest that some individuals can develop a dependency on social media that's not unlike an addiction to alcohol or drugs." And that's, I think, a scary statement where individuals developing dependency on social media that's not unlike an addiction to alcohol or drugs. The quote continues with: "Their over dependence on social media has led to symptoms typically associated with substance use disorder." So we are seeing that social media overdependence can lead to symptoms that are associated with substance use disorders. The article also mentioned that there are now therapeutic programs in psychiatric hospitals, behavioral health clinics in the US dedicating to treating this type of addiction, dedicating to treating social media addiction as another compulsive disorder. The article discusses how, in a 2019 survey, 40% of US online users aged 18 to 22 report feeling addicted to social media, and 5% of those respondents admit to the statement, "I am addicted to social media." It's interesting because social media technology and social media in general, I mean, 30 years, when you think about the mental health space, when you think about the notion of 30 years and trying to use that to determine, well, is this a net positive, a net negative? I think it's hard to determine that because for such a new technology in the relative scheme of things, we still don't know about the long-term effects. The long-term effects on development, the long-term effects of overuse, overdependence, etc. But anyways, let's tie this back to dopamine. So, with dopamine being that neurotransmitter we talked about that is involved in these feelings of pleasure, reward, motivation, etc. For some users of social media, dopamine increases happen when they get likes or comments, or their views go up, or maybe they get a retweet, or somebody reacts with an emoji. That triggers a dopamine response, and it feels good, and it reinforces that, hey, this feels really good to me. So I'm going to keep doing it. I mean, I know people that talk about scrolling through social media for hours. And I'm one of those people in moments where I'm just kind of laying in bed and I'm scrolling, 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 and then a few hours go by and it's like, whoa, what the hell just happened? It's even gone as far as certain social media apps limiting time or adding some of these features to combat this notion of addiction among users. And I think when social media is used to provide validation, to act as a source of stress relief, to act as a coping mechanism against kind of the various stresses of the world, the same way we talk about escapism, the same way we talk about awareness, the same way we talk about dopamine. If you haven't listened to those episodes, have a listen. But I think it's all connected. I think some people use social media as an escape. I think some people use it as a source of dopamine, as a, well, this makes me feel good, so I'm going to check it and I'm going to check my phone and I'm going to check my phone. And this notion of checking your phone all the time or isolating or living through our phones can be this very harmful loop because we're on our phone too much. We receive that dopamine and that validation. We put our phones down. We go try to live our lives, and then we seek that dopamine again. So we go back on social media. And then that can cause conflict in our lives if we're on our phone too much. That can affect our relationships. That can affect our friendships. That can affect our work and our livelihood. And then when conflict arises there, we're used to using social media as an escape tool or as a dopamine hit. So we go and seek that again. So when we talk about dopamine and this chasing reward, I think in the previous episode I talked about these grandiose rewards of, you know, a house or a family or a nice car or lots of money. But I think this notion of dopamine can also happen with a flood of likes. I got 500 views and I got 200 likes and people resonate with me and people like me and I feel validated and I feel loved. And it becomes this habit and this addiction. So personally, I would challenge anyone listening to, if you resonate with this, if you feel you're in this dopamine loop, there are ways to try to combat that. And this article lists some small and realistic changes, but one example in my life is I've uninstalled quite a bit of social media. Still on TikTok for the Black Sheep coaching. Um, I still have Facebook Messenger to communicate with people. And I think social media can have its place, but I think similar to other things in our lives, it needs to be used responsibly. If you find that social media is this this quote unquote drug for you, perhaps it's time to analyze whether that's something you want to, whether that's a habit you want to break. So this article lists some steps and some tips for digital detox, which I've heard that word thrown around. But getting off social media for a week or two, maybe a month, etc., and just focusing on experiencing life and getting outside and indulging in hobbies and exploring new hobbies, I think that can be extremely beneficial as a way to start to improve life. Maybe there are things that you've always wanted to do, or maybe there are people that you haven't seen in a while. And perhaps the hours on social media is detracting from that or preventing that or a barrier to that. So, some of the tips here are stop using your phone as an alarm. Instead, use an actual alarm clock. I've also heard the notion of for the first hour of the day, do not check your phone. I mean, you can pick it up and respond to your partner if needed and say good morning and things like that. But for the first hour, your phone is away. No social media checking, none of that. I've actually tried that and it can be extremely helpful. And if an hour seems daunting, try 10 minutes at first, then 15, then 20, and take it gradual, or maybe start at 2 minutes and then bump it up and bump it up. And what you'll see is you'll find more time and space. One of the other tips is turning off notifications. Now, as far as I'm concerned, there are certain notifications on your phone that we may not need. Do we really need Facebook to tell us every time someone likes a photo? Do we really need that Instagram that somebody, shared something, or the Twitter retweet, etc.? So turning off those notifications or using the do not disturb function on the phone, that can be a very good way to detox. Monitoring the amount of time you spend on your device. Now, this is one that I normally don't do, but there are apps like Screen Time and Digital Wellbeing, according to this article, that can help control daily usage. And sticking to one device at a time. I'm guilty of this. Having the TV on and the phone and the laptop, it's just inundating us with media and messaging, and there's so much information coming at our brains that I think it can feel overwhelming at times. Try not to revert to your phone in awkward social situations. And I know this is one that, even reading this one, I'm like, oh boy, because I've been guilty of it too, where, there's a conversation or you're kind of in a quiet with somebody and you're kind of, oh, well, it's quiet. I'm going to pull out my phone and just check some stuff. But I've been more adamant about trying to keep my phone in my pocket when I'm with friends or when I'm out to dinner with somebody. I think it's important to have that one on one connection and realize that we don't have to be beholden to our phones. And the last one in this article is above everything else, make sure you aren't answering a quick text or using the web when you drive. And I think there's been a lot of PSAs and a lot of information about texting while driving and distracted driving. So I'm not necessarily sure that one falls into digital detox, um, but I think it's still a good message to put out there. So there seem to be a variety of benefits in using social media, but also a variety of consequences that can arise from the abuse or the overuse or the overdependence on social media. And I think when we have these social media accounts and we're getting likes on our pictures and we're getting a high number of views and we're getting attention and we're getting people talking to us where normally we're not used to that, I think that can produce that that dopamine hit. And I think it can be addicting. And that seems to be reinforced by some of these studies. So I know we're talking about needs and wants, but I'd really suggest having a look at these articles, thinking about and being aware of uh, your dopamine. I'm not going to say addictions, but dopamine habits or dopamine related behavior, and examining social media use and determining, is this healthy for me? And it doesn't have to be all or nothing, but I think finding the balance in just about everything we do is extremely important. Having this balance where it can play a positive role in our lives without detracting from our lives. So, anyways, hope you enjoyed this episode. Social media is something that I feel very conflicted on because I'm on it, I use it, but I also recognize some of the patterns in myself, and I've seen it in other people where it does seem like it has these addictive properties. So, wanted to talk a little bit about that. But, anyways, thank you for listening. And on the next episode, we'll go into needs and wants. What's the difference? I'd like to thank you all for listening. A small reminder that you can find all our links on linktree/Black Sheep Coaching. That's linktr.ee/Black Sheep Coaching. It would also mean a lot if you could support the podcast by subscribing, liking, sharing, or becoming a patron on Patreon. I hope this episode assisted you in finding direction and moving with intention. And remember that big journeys start with small steps.